You know, as an American, growing up with the name Kavanaugh, we were always told, oh, you're Irish, but you know, we're American, so what do we know? But I am incredibly honored to be here, to be an honorary Irish person, but also just to be in the space with all of you. I spend so much of my time, so much of my clinical work, so much of my research with families, with people living with motor neuron disease, with Huntington's disease and Parkinson's disease. And so all of my clinical work really attends to families and children in and living with and affected by neurological conditions. This is my background. It's probably the most boring slide up here, but just to say that I've done a lot of work over the years really trying to dig in and understand how disease impacts the child in the family. And what kinds of resources, what kinds of education, what kinds of interventions might be helpful, not just for that child, but for the family, for the adults, for the people in the room. And I want to make sure that before I talk anymore, before this whole conversation becomes about me and my words, I want to make sure that we ground it really solidly in the words of children themselves. I've done so many interviews over the years and asked them, tell me about your story. Tell me about your family. What is it that you're going through? What do you need? How can we help you? And this is a quote by a young woman that I interviewed coming up on 20 years ago. And she said, if someone says, how's your mom doing? I'll say, oh, she's doing all right. But maybe it'd be nice if someone asked about me, how I was doing. Like, because I will have an answer. And she said it just like that, because she was 15. She will have an answer. And that's the key, and that's one of the things I'm so honored to be here, is that I can often be that conduit for the children and families, for the young kids who don't often have a voice, who need to be heard, and programs and interventions need to be created. Shameless plug, this afternoon I'm going to be doing a workshop where we're going to dig in deep into what is it like to have those conversations? What do we need? What tools? What resources? So I'm not going to spend a tremendous time on that this morning. Also, I was told to speed it up because we're running late. No promises. I am a professor, so we'll see. One of the things we know about children in illness, when children are living in families where there is a person with an illness, they want to know what's happening. Okay? They want to know, and they want to know from the person living with the illness themselves. What we know is when they are kept in the dark, that's when we see anxiety, that's when we see depression, that's when we see stress in these children and youth. But when they're engaged in the conversation, when they're part of it, then they learn coping skills, much the way we as adults learn and adapt to illness and create our own coping skills. So when we think about families and illness, children are absolutely integral. So it's about knowing that they are there. They're hearing, they're seeing, they're participating, and it's key to make sure that they're part of that conversation. But what we also know is that it might be the most difficult conversation that families ever have, to sit down and say, I have this thing. This is what is happening, and that I will very likely die with this disease. I don't know when, I don't know how, we don't know the process, but that is the most complicated and heart-wrenching and difficult thing that a parent has to do. And we know that oftentimes the barriers to that conversation are because they don't want to be emotional in front of their child. Should I cry? We were talking about this last night at dinner. Should I cry? If I cry, does that make me feel weak? Does that give me the strength to show my child that they can cry and they can emote, and that's okay? Also, aren't I not protecting them? I want them to have a childhood. I want them to not have to experience this. But what we know in the research that myself and my colleagues have been doing for years is when we protect, when we shield them from information, that's when we see children really come out of it with very complex responses, with complicated grief that remained unresolved while that person was going through the process. And that is profound because it's not only just good for the child to have the conversation, but for the parent to be able to say, this is what this is. Let me share this with you. Let me honor you and you honor me. Something I don't ever want to miss out is the conversation around culture and societal expectations and religiosity and spirituality. Those are huge things that often limit, sometimes provide extra guidance, but often can create a barrier. So sometimes I really encourage our families, understand what it is about the culture that says you shouldn't talk. Or who do we talk to that might be able to provide us religious or spiritual guidance? And finally, one of the biggest barriers is that people living with an illness don't have enough information themselves. So what is it that you, as the person living with motor neuron disease, with Huntington's, with Parkinson's, what is it that you can do to boost your education to then be able to provide that to your child? Because it's about that modeling. When you feel supported and confident, you're able to provide that to your child or youth. And when children are engaged in conversation, they respond back and say, it is so important. It's just like talking to her, I think is probably the best thing. Just kind of like good communication and stuff like that. So I think having a conversation with her helps a lot. And this was from a child that I interviewed about their family living with, we refer to it as ALS in the US, so my apologies if I interchange that. But this was about their conversation and how important it was for that child to be able to have that conversation with her parent. The other thing that I want to make sure that we talk about really briefly, big topic, sorry, dropping it here, is end of life in children. Death and dying in children. I am always the bearer of the most intense conversations wherever I am. But this is incredibly important, that when you ask children about what their parent wants or doesn't want, they want to know. They want to talk about end of life. They want to understand what's going to happen. They want to understand, is there going to be a bed in the living room, and what is a hospital bed? And what does hospice mean? Why is palliative care a thing? And so this is all part of these really complex yet incredibly important conversations. And one of the studies I did a number of years ago, we set out and interviewed many, many children across the US about what they did and didn't know about their parents' end-of-life wishes. Had you ever talked to them about it? What did you talk about? What would be helpful for you? What kinds of information would you like to know? And they talked about their willingness to have that conversation. But as children, they said, we know that they don't want to talk about it. We want to talk about it. We're kids. And we were saying last night at dinner, adults, we come to all of these conversations with an entire trainload of baggage behind us. Our kids come to the conversation with none of that. They're just, what's going on? Talk to me. What's happening? And so in this study, we found that kids were actively wanting to have the conversation, but they were also actively seeking to protect their parent, because they knew it was a complicated and difficult conversation, and they didn't want to hurt their parent, but they wanted to know. The other thing is anticipatory grief. And this is another very important topic when we talk about how are we sharing and what are we sharing and what content are we sharing. And children and youth feel grief. They feel the anticipatory grief acutely. Because what they're seeing is they're grieving the losses. They're grieving the loss of the bear hug from grandpa. They're grieving the loss of playing soccer with dad. They're grieving the loss of all of the things that we as adults are, how do we treat this? What do we need to think about this? They're grieving those interactive losses. And so as you think about progression, as you all think about what are the next steps and how I engage with my speech therapist and my respiratory therapist or the physician, ask those questions, what might be coming next and how can I prepare my child for those smaller diagnoses along the way? Because it's those progressions, those tiny losses, might be tiny, might be big, might feel tiny, might feel big, but those losses are what the children see. And how can we adapt? What kind of new normal can we bring into the picture? So if it isn't playing soccer, maybe it's playing soccer with the power chair. And if we used to go on hikes, maybe we go on walks with the power chair, get the big sturdy, hefty ones with the big wheels, go on the beach. You know, it's not about saying that's it. It's about these are the losses and what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to adapt and create new normals? And one of the things I also want to make sure that we talk about in this brief conversation is that children and youth are also deeply involved in caregiving. And I often, when I give this conversation, at least in the US, people freak out a bit because in the US, the expectation is that that's abuse and neglect and the child needs to be removed from the home. But the truth is, children are actively involved in care across the continuum. And they do it for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's economic, sometimes it's simply there's someone in the house and something needs to be done. But children engage in care out of love and desire and the wish to help just as much as they participate out of economic reasons. And another quote I want to say, being a caregiver requires constant sacrifice of my time and occasionally my emotions. It requires me to set aside what I'm feeling or doing in order that I can care for my mom. And this is a 14-year-old, and she drew that picture. She gave it to me because she wanted me to share it with as many people as possible. And her umbrella is shielding her from all of the emotions and the things that kids say and all the things that come at you. And that umbrella is how she's taking care of herself in this really complex world, living with a parent with ALS. I'll briefly go over this, but this is just some of the data, what we know about children and youth who are caregivers. There's actually a young carer organization here in Ireland. It's part of Carers, I believe it's called Carers Ireland. Someone correct me, thank you for that. They do work with children and youth who are caregivers. They have resources, they have respite, they have support. So I strongly encourage you to reach out to them. But what we know around the world is that it doesn't matter what disease it is, it doesn't matter the illness. There are children and youth, often as young as 6, involved in caregiving, and they're doing any kind of care task that an adult does. And the issue is they are the most hidden of caregivers because we aren't actively engaging our young children and asking about the care they provide and the participation that they have. And this is a study that we did asking youth, what do you need? So you're a caregiver, you help your family member, what do you need to provide that care? And they talked about they need emotional support from someone, an adult, a parent, a peer. They need resources, they need information, and they need someone to help them actively provide care. So someone to kind of do the lifting or do the thing, and that would help them feel like they had that support. And the truth is, it's not all negative. There are so many positives, and there's such a balance, right, of how we weigh this out. And one of the things that we know is that they acknowledge providing care, but it makes them feel good about themselves. They enjoy that. They want to be a part of it, but they want resources and they want support. And we also know that a large number of our children and youth who are caregivers go into care professions, go into social work, go into nursing, go into psychology. And that's a beautiful thing because they're able to carry that throughout their lifetime. And the last thing I'll say before I get into some specifics and show you a brief film, I think I have enough time. Am I okay? No? Okay. I panicked when they were like, hurry. Creating a new normal. This is probably the most important thing. That living with illness, having a child or youth be a part of that family is about creating your new normal. It's not what it was, and it won't be what it will be. It is what it is now. And children and youth see that. They want to be able to do the thing, just do it differently. They want to be able to have the conversation, and they want to be able to be the kid, just doing the different thing. So one of the really important takeaways is that it's good, it's bad, it's complicated, but the criticality of creating something that's your new normal is incredibly important. And one of the ways that I've been going about doing that, so I gave a talk not that long ago, and I realized it was just over 25 years ago when I was just finishing my master's degree, and I was a baby social worker and trying to figure out what to do and not mess everything up completely. That's when I first started meeting children and youth in families in neurological conditions and trying to figure out why were they talking to me about a feeding tube? Why were they talking to me about the best way to use Hoyer lifts? And it really changed my entire trajectory and made me realize children and youth are where the gaps in resources really are. And one of the things that I've done recently in partnership with some colleagues in both South Africa and the Netherlands is we've created a global nonprofit with the sole purpose of creating as many educational resources, interventions, videos for children and youth around the world living with complex neurological conditions. And so we have a program called Y Care. I'll talk about that. We have Lukey and the Lights. I'm going to show that film in just a moment. And then we have lots of books and materials. And in the afternoon session, we're going to go over what all these resources are because they all address very specifically using the words of the youth. It's using my research. We wrote the books with the actual words of the youth saying, this is what we know, this is what we want to know, and this is the support we need. So briefly, the Y Care program, this is a program for children and youth who are caregiving, but have never had any way to talk about it and have never had any way to get support. And what the program is based on, these are all kids doing all kinds of fun activities because it is fun. It's based on the data that we have that says when you ask children and youth who are caregivers, actively caregiving, very few have ever received any sort of guidance or any sort of peer interaction and support in doing that care. And we've set out to create a program that is based on peer engagement. It's based on guidance by trained healthcare professionals. So we have PTs, OTs, respiratory, speech therapists, physicians. Kids go during a day, and these are some of the publications that we have because we do collect data on it to make sure what's working and what's not working. And throughout the course of the day, here's the modules that they go through. And they spend about 30 to 45 minutes talking about basic care. Am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? Physical therapist helps engage them how to do it right. With respiratory, they get to actually put the BiPAP on their face. And what does that feel like? That changes how they understand when the beep goes off or when the light goes off, what they should or shouldn't be doing. We talk about food textures and why some people have difficulty swallowing more so than others. Is it about thin liquids? Is it about thicker? We give them the big cupcake with the ginormous mountain of icing on the top, and we say, put that in your mouth, but eat it without using your tongue. And the icing immediately sticks to the top of their mouth, and they're all like, It's visual, it's visceral, they feel it, they understand it. And they're able to really translate that into their family's experience. The program, this is just some pictures from some basic care, feeding, and communication. They all get a little handbook. They take notes, they can take pictures, they can exchange information. This is pictures of some of the professionals that we've worked with. We've trained, this slide's outdated, we've trained now almost 150 professionals in locations around the world for doing this program and adapting it to whatever location, whatever culture, whatever language is needed. And this is some of the data that kids say. This is just some brief comments, but there's a lot of people living in the same situation. So think about yourself when you feel like, gosh, as an adult, who am I talking to? What kinds of resources do I have? It's magnified for children. So being able to put them in the space with other children and youth and say, what's going on? How do you feel about this? What is that experience? They're saying, I'm not alone, right? We all have the same things. And I've learned to get to know them, to know the other youth and feel less isolated. And here's some of the resources, some of the books, some of the materials. The book, there's a graphic novel in the middle. It says MND. That's a graphic novel for children and youth, and it walks through what is MND. It walks through how do I talk to my friends about it? What do I say to my school? And how do I understand caregiving? And at the very end of the book, in all of my books that I've written, I always address grief, loss, death, and dying. It's part of the process, and we can't not address it. And all of the books are written in different developmental ages and stages. The book down there, Hidden Helpers, I do a lot of work in our military and veteran community. And those children are told to be strong. Like, you just be strong. That's the way you are. You're in the military, be strong. And so what we've created is a book of superheroes, because caregiving is a superhero skill. And so they get to create their own superhero. I have a book on genetics and ALS. I didn't spend much time in this presentation, but I'm happy to spend more time this afternoon in the workshop. But in working with the ALS Canadian Association, we wrote a whole book on how to talk to your children about genetics. It's complicated, and we spent loads of time with lots of genetic counselors and families really helping to flesh that out. And the last thing I'm going to talk about, you'll see in the right-hand corner there, Lukey and the Lights. So Lukey and the Lights is a film that was created about, we started almost 4 years ago with a family from the Netherlands. And they were young. He was 35. He'd been diagnosed with ALS, and they had 2 small children. And they wanted to create a tool. They'd seen my graphic novel. It had been translated into Dutch, but they wanted a video. They wanted to make a movie. And so what we set out to do was quite the process, and that's a whole conference presentation just in itself, like how to make an animated short film. And there's no language. You'll see it in just a moment. There's no language, and it's about a robot full of light bulbs with all his little robot friends, and he gets ALS. And it's about what happens to this robot when he gets ALS. And the thing is, you take it out of the human form, and you can watch it differently. You can resonate with it differently because it's not a human, it's a robot. And we were able to pack in the entire, from initial notice of change all the way to the dying process in just under a 10-minute film. So I think I have enough time. If I don't, my apologies to everybody in the room. And I think we want to watch it, yeah? It's deeply emotional. My apologies, I need to have a full disclaimer. It can be very, very emotional. So just full honesty there.
Wat is er? Hey! How's up? Huh? Ja. Oh. Yeah. Oh, looky! Oh. Ah.
I've seen, obviously, since the very first drawing of Lukey all the way to the finish. I still get emotional. Anyo died about 1.5 years ago, and he was my brother from another mother, and drove me absolutely bananas, and I drove him bananas, and it was one of the best working relationships ever. So every time I see it, I still get emotional. But I believe I'm at the end of my time. The afternoon workshop, I'd love to have you join me. We're going to delve deeper into this topic, go through some resources. And again, I can't thank everybody enough who I work with in the US and the Netherlands. And I also do a lot of work in South Africa, and they have completely informed a lot of the programming. So thank you all. Sorry to leave you in tears. Thank you all so very much.